So it turns out the year 2000 was the year Natasha Lyonne ruled the realm of iconic lesbian films. And that is the elixir that has kept her cool as hell throughout the years. Lesbian fame? It's forever, baby. I have been meaning to watch If These Walls Could Talk Too for a very long time, mainly because of these pictures of Chloe Sevigny looking slicker than an oil spill, and now I finally watched it. I can tell you, it was one of the best 1.5 hours of my life. I mean, yes, the bar is low, but this film has it all. Natasha Lyonne playing a jealous ex-girlfriend in this shirt. The chemistry between Linda and Amy being so intense, you will grow a third ovary, get pregnant with triplets, and those triplets will all grow up to be Lebanese. This lesbian bartender who looks like a 60-year-old Chapel Roan. A cameo from Noble Land mermaid Rashida Jones. Ellen DeGeneres and Sharon Stone sporting 90s boy band haircuts whilst making love to each other with Dido's hit single Thank You playing in the background. And last but not least, the organic free-roaming nipples. That is relevant to my interests as a God-fearing heterosexual Christian woman. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video we're just going to be discussing the film If These Walls Could Talk Too. This video started off as a review, but it then became a mix of a review, a think piece, a breakdown, an analysis. It basically became Frankenstein's lesbian monster. Okay. Anyway, if you're not familiar with If These Walls Could Talk Too, it tells the stories of 3 lesbian couples who live in the same house at different periods of time. 1961 follows Edith Tree, who attempts to get used to life on her own after her female partner of over 50 years passes away. 1972 sees a feminist co-ed and the disapproval of her friends when she unexpectedly falls for a butch outsider. And 2000 follows a lesbian couple who face complications and confusions when they decide to try for a child. Cool. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start with the 1961 story. Now, this section is interesting because it offers an insight into what life was like for a lesbian couple living in 1960s America. And it opens on a clip from the 1961 film, The Children's Hour, which is significant because The Children's Hour is a film that really captures the shifting societal perception of homosexuality that was happening within the 60s. And the 60s were a decade that saw a real growth in gay and lesbian activism, the Stonewall Uprising, the end of the Hays Code, and certain states decriminalizing male homosexuality. So this growing activism and awareness that encouraged people to question the prejudices that had formed around gay people was starting to be reflected in the media of this decade, with The Children's Hour being a prime example. And The Children's Hour is also significant because it's a production which explores homosexuality through a sympathetic lens and frames the hatred and judgment towards it in a negative light. And this was a huge progression for on-screen portrayals of homosexuality in American cinema at the time. And we see what this means to Abby and Edith, who are holding hands and appear quite emotional whilst they are watching this. This section of the film also portrays the general homophobic climate of this era, with a straight couple walking out of the Children's Hour disgusted. That was actually Harold and his wife, if you know, you know, and Abby and Edith withdrawing physical affection because they are wary of the teenagers recognizing them as other and potentially causing issues for them. There's also a scene of an elderly man, Sam, offering to escort them home, which implies that he assumes that 2 women without a man must be in need of one. And his actions are not necessarily ill-intended, but it's a reminder that heteronormativity and male interest is always present and persistent. And I think what's sad about these scenes is, in my experience, certain things haven't really changed all that much. For example, men noticing that 2 women are on their own and assuming that they're needed or wanted, and as a lesbian couple having to withdraw affection in public because you're afraid of the abuse you might receive. I mean, there's no question that today things are a lot better than they were. Most people are not homophobic assholes, or at the very least know how to mind their own business. But still, there was a lot I recognized in this section of the film as being true to my own life and experiences as a lesbian in 2025, which is interesting. I also really appreciated the visual storytelling that conveyed how pervasive heteronormativity was in that era. For example, after Abby and Edith get away from Sam, they walk past a huge advert displaying images of heterosexual domestic bliss, which again serves to show how heteronormativity loomed over gay people as a constant reminder. And then there's the smaller visual details such as the empty picture spaces on the wall, where Edith took down the pictures of her and Abby due to Abby's family coming to visit, which emphasizes not only her caution but represents the erasure or invisibility of homosexual couples in that era too. And there's the caged bird wallpaper in Abby and Edith's bedroom, which not only ties into the bird theme of their story, but caged birds can also symbolize oppression, limitations, and the longing for freedom, which is relevant to both the socio-legal oppression of gay people within this era and how Abby and Edith's romance is confined to their home, which is the only place that's safe for them to express affection towards each other. There's also some very heartfelt moments where we see Abby and Edith returning to their own safe haven, where they are finally free to be themselves. And I have to say, the interior design in that crib goes hard. That is exactly the kind of place a lot of lesbians dream of living with their wife. And the fact that this house is their one safe haven from an overwhelmingly heteronormative and judgmental society makes Edith losing it all the more devastating. Abby's death leads to the portrayal of what happened to so many real-life lesbian couples from that era, where one half became sick or passed away, and due to having to hide the true nature of their relationship and having no equal marriage rights, the other half was denied hospital visitation and was often left with no inheritance or benefits. In the film, we see that as Abby lies in hospital, Edith is denied access because she's not a family member or a spouse. And this is contrasted against the straight married woman who is granted access to her sick husband and is also able to express her sorrows and love for him openly. Furthermore, because Edith isn't a spouse or a family member, the property that she paid for and lived in with Abby goes to Abby's nephew Ted. And because Edith has to keep the true nature of their relationship a secret, both her grief and attachment to the house are diminished because of it. So not only does Edith have to grieve in isolation, but she has no legal support or grounds in keeping her own property. And like I said earlier, this was something that happened to so many real-life lesbian couples throughout history, and in some parts of the world, it's still a current-day reality. There's a really touching moment where Edith makes a speech to Ted's daughter about how Abby couldn't bear to see anything suffer, and when they were girls, Abby had her own little hospital for all the birds and mice that she rescued from her cat and would help them to survive. And Abby's kindness and compassion is later contrasted against Ted telling his daughter to just leave the baby starling that has fallen from the nest to die because it's not supposed to make it. And there's a lot of commentary here about compassion and helping vulnerable creatures instead of abandoning them, which relates to the way gay people who at that time were a vulnerable minority were shunned instead of being helped by society, especially since starlings are often seen as symbols of community due to their large flocking behavior. And this commentary continues when Edith goes out and rescues the baby starling that fell from the nest, which is not only a tribute to Abby, but after this, the camera pans to an empty house and we see a grown starling inside, who then proceeds to fly out of the window. And this represents Edith leaving the nest she built with Abby, and since birds are a symbol of hope, it also portrays the goodness that can come from acts of compassion and care. It's poetic cinema. Interestingly, starlings also represent adaptability and communication, with some cultures believing they guide people between life and death, which is also relevant to Abby and Edith's story here. So the 1961 story is rather emotional and heavy, but I think that it's fitting for that era and reflects how heavy and difficult life was for lesbians back then. I also think this section of the film did a good job of portraying the impact that inequality had on the lives of lesbians. Rather than telling or preaching, it lets the audience make up their own mind about what they're seeing. And I also think it did a good job job of portraying the tragic elements of Abby and Edith's story without leaving the viewer feeling completely hopeless. Moving on to the 1972 story, Groovy. Now, the 70s were a period of huge social and political changes in America. Women gained reproductive health care rights, certain protections against discrimination in the workplace, and for housing and credit and access to birth control. Homosexuality was removed from the list of mental disorders by the American Psychiatric Association, and even more states passed laws decriminalizing homosexual activity and prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation. So all of this highlights just how radically the socio-political landscape had shifted from that of the 1960s. So in the 1972 section of the film, we're introduced to a group of out and proud lesbians all living together. Some of them are exes. Too real. Not for me, but for some of you. And we're also introduced to Linda's nipples, which I appreciated in a feminist, respectful, scientific way. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this section of the film is the portrayal of how lesbians were excluded or unwelcome from the second wave feminist movement. And this is shown in the film with the lesbian group being told by the feminist group leader Diane that the college told us we can't have our meetings on campus anymore. They don't want to support us because they think we're a lesbian group. We feel it's too risky to include your issues right now. There isn't any room for you guys. And this speech reflects the conversations that were taking place in feminist circles at this time, where straight women felt like lesbians were hurting the feminist cause because of all the negative associations around homosexuality. And this highlights the lack of intersectionality and female solidarity, and also how prevalent homophobia still was within this era, despite all of the progression being made. And this is why intersectionality in feminism and female identity is interesting, because lesbians are both women and homosexual. They cannot separate one from the other. And so in feminist spaces where the majority of women are heterosexual and either have no understanding of gay experience and history or are just straight up homophobic, it can leave lesbians feeling sidelined or unwelcome in those spaces. And I think the film does a good job of showing how the solidarity that lesbians have shown straight women in the feminist movement has not always been returned, even if it didn't have the time to go too deeply into it. The next aspect of the 1972 story that I found interesting is the portrayal of the hostility and prejudice within the lesbian community. The lesbian group that the story follows are all feminine or gender-conforming women, and when they head to a lesbian bar and see that it's full of butches and gender non-conforming lesbians, they become very judgmental. But it's notable that there's also a hostility from the bartender and the gender non-conforming lesbians towards the group, with the bartender even asking them if they're in the right place, which implies that they don't read as gay and are therefore treated as a group of straight women encroaching on a gay space. Linda even has to point out to the bartender that they are gay too. So whilst this scene exposes the judgmental attitude that some lesbians hold towards gender non-conforming lesbians, it also exposes how feminine or gender-conforming lesbians are also subjected to judgmental attitudes and often invisible within the community. This bar is where Linda meets Amy, who is a acts of service butch lesbian. No woman will be lighting her own cigarette on her watch. And this relationship is interesting because it opens up conversations about and explores the misconceptions around gender nonconformity. There's a scene where Linda asks Amy, "Why do you dress like a man and do you see yourself as a woman?" To which Amy responds, "This is how I feel comfortable. This is me. It can't be any other way." And it's a simple answer. Amy explains that she presents herself in the way she feels comfortable, and it has nothing to do with her wanting to be the opposite sex. When Linda introduces Amy to the group, they go into full-on Mean Girls mode and make non-stop jokes equating Amy to a man. And all of this is a portrayal of how certain lesbians internalize the way that heteronormative society conflates clothing and appearance with sex, and how, as a result, women who perform femininity are accepted, and women who refuse to perform it are ridiculed. And this judgment against deviation from the norm mirrors societal attitudes around sexuality, where heterosexuality is the accepted norm and homosexuality is othered and ridiculed. And what's interesting is the infighting around gender nonconformity in the lesbian community is ongoing to this day. I mean, some of what's portrayed in this section of the film may as well have been set in 2025. To be fair, there's also an interesting scene where Jeannie tells Linda, in relation to the way Amy dresses, that we fought so hard to break free of those rules, which suggests her disdain of masculinity in women is coming from a place of her thinking that lesbians, quote, wanting to be men by dressing like them, end quote, is a reductive stereotype that doesn't reflect well on the community and is something she wants to get away from. And from a lesbian perspective, I can understand the mindset of wanting to get away from anything associated with men. But of course, dressing in a masculine way doesn't actually have anything to do with men, and the way that a lesbian chooses to present herself is not what's harmful to the lesbian community. The root of the issue is all of the expectations, misconceptions, and prejudices around sex, gender presentation, and lesbianism embedded into our society. A further point of interest is that Amy tells the group that she likes to stay ready and alert in case somebody tries to mess with her. And this is because of the way she dresses, and Jeannie tells her that she could make it easier on herself by dressing differently, which mirrors a lot of victim-blaming arguments and taps into the misogynistic notion that women are always in some way to blame for the abusive behavior of others, usually due to their presentation. All of the group's judgments and hostilities are called out when Linda finally snaps at them, saying, "You want to know why you don't like Amy? Because you're scared of anyone who's not just like you," which connects to what we were discussing earlier with the dragging and ridiculing of butch lesbians by feminine lesbians, mirroring the dragging and ridiculing of gay people by straight people. And what Linda's saying underscores that the source of contempt in both of these cases stems from a deviation of what is known, accepted, and familiar. And this is reiterated when Linda goes to Amy's house and tells her, "Amy, all of this time I haven't been ashamed of who you are. I've been ashamed of myself. You accept who you are, and I love that about you. I want to be like you." So this speech builds a bridge between self-acceptance and acceptance of others. I have to say, I was not expecting Linda and Amy's chemistry to be that intense. I think they have some of the most intense chemistry I've ever seen in a lesbian film. And I found their love scene refreshing because, yes, it was on fire, but it was also fun. And it felt as though the actors were comfortable and were given room to breathe, which allowed for a more organic performance. Another aspect of the 1972 story I appreciated is the romantic visuals. For example, the lover on the back of the motorbike, turning up at someone's house in the middle of the night to apologise, Amy bringing Linda flowers, visuals that are similar to what you might see in 80s and 90s straight rom-coms. And I really enjoyed it because, historically speaking, there hasn't been a lot of that in lesbian films at all, so it fills a void, so to speak. Lesbian cinema nature is healing. I also think this section of the film did well in balancing out the portrayal of a blossoming romance against exploring some of the social issues of that period. Especially in such a short amount of time, it feels like a complete film within a film, and that's really a testament to how good the writing, pacing, structure, and acting is. And finally, moving on to the 2000 story where Fran and Cal are pulling a season 1 L-word bet and Tina. They are on the hunt for the missing ingredient needed for them to make a baby. No man is safe. Now, the 2000s were a decade where the subject of gay rights were heavily in the spotlight, with conversations taking place around the subject of gay marriage and don't ask, don't tell. But this section of the film is not really focused on social or political issues. It's more focused on a lesbian couple simply trying to start a family. And as much as I enjoyed the light-hearted feel of this story, I think this is the one section of the film where the writing is it's a mixed bag. Cal is on an emotional journey of acceptance experience with not being able to biologically have a baby with her partner Fran. And I absolutely think it's valid to portray the frustration that some lesbians feel over the fact that they're not able to have a biological child with their partner. However, even though Cal eventually realizes that the biological aspect is not what's important in having and raising a child, I don't know that her journey of acceptance translated that well or was written in the best way. It's possible the writing felt awkward to me because of the way Ellen delivered the monologue about her frustrations. There was a lot of stuttering. It felt a bit all over the place. I'm not sure if it was the writing, the performance, or if it was both, but I just felt like it could have been a bit cleaner. There was also some questionable dialogue where Fran says, maybe we should think about having an ethnic baby. Ethnic babies are so beautiful. And I know there was no ill intent behind this line, but the focus on children's looks, as though they were shopping for dolls or an accessory, felt odd and shallow to me. And this continued in other scenes where they were parked up outside a school, watching children and picking out which ones were beautiful and cute. And again, I know these scenes are innocent and well-meaning, but I don't know that the focus on looks or parking up outside a school to watch other people's children has aged particularly well. However, what did age well was the meaningful dialogue towards the end, where Fran and Cal are talking about their parenting doubts and fears. Fran asks if it's selfish to want to bring a child into such a crazy world, especially to gay parents, which would increase its chances of being bullied in school. And Cal tries to reassure her that most kids have a hard time in school, and that hopefully the world will have changed by the time their child is older. To which Fran asks, what if it doesn't? And Cal then gives a beautiful speech where she points out that it always has, and follows that with, all I want to do is love you. Just keep loving you and love our kid and have that kid witness our love. It's all from love. How can that be wrong? And I thought this was a really reassuring and beautiful way to answer the doubts and questions over raising a child as a gay couple, where love is prioritized and prevails over fear. And I think a lot of what's said in this speech is still relevant to gay couples wanting to start a family today. I think what I appreciated the most about the 2000 story is how fun and lighthearted it is. It's a nice contrast to the opening of the film, which portrays lesbian suffering and tragedy, and for the film to open on that but close with a portrayal of lesbian joy and happiness was a really beautiful and powerful message to end things on. Overall, I really love this film. It may not be perfect on a technical level. I mean, it is a product of the early 2000s, but it has so much heart and soul that it doesn't really matter. I think for the most part, the writing and visual storytelling is thoughtful and intelligent. It does a good job of letting the audience make up their own minds about certain issues. It's not preachy, and the acting and direction is also pretty solid. There's a lot of heartfelt performances, and as a piece of lesbian cinema that reflects real life experiences and issues, it's interesting to watch this in 2025 and see what's changed and what has stayed the same. Okay guys, if you've seen If These Walls Could Talk Too, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!